It is Thanksgiving weekend. We celebrate all that God has done. We celebrate the land. It is a harvest Thanksgiving. God gives us the seed, the earth, the rain, the sunshine, and there is a great bounty. We celebrate in our church great flowers in our courtyards. Some families will come together for big dinners, meals to celebrate what God has done. This is a lesson for today in Deuteronomy, and we also hear about it in the Psalm. For the Hebrew people, they were very clear that God had given the land, a land of milk and honey. They had lived such transitory, nomadic lives. From the time of Abraham, all the descendants seemed to go from place to place, and land was traded amongst the family. The people had spent 400 years in Egypt. They spent another 40 years wandering in the wilderness, preparing themselves to be in the promised land. They came to the place. It was Palestine, Canaan. There were other people there. But for them, this was the promise of having a place of their own where they and future generations could have security, could have independence, could be self-determining, where they could have hope. It was the land that God had given to them. As we read through the Old Testament, Numbers, Judges, the prophets, we find that every generation or two, it seems that the people forgot about this promise. They broke the covenant and they lost the land. They mixed with Canaanites and others who were around them. They intermarried, which is natural enough. They followed false gods, and they did not stay true to the God of the covenant. Israel really is quite a small area, not even 250 miles from north to south, from the Lebanon border to the Egyptian border, and less than 100 miles going across, bordering on Jordan. And it seems that in this small land, every century or two or three, some new people would come through, a new wave of people that would dominate it and take it over. Last summer, I was at a sound and light show at the Tower of David in the Old City in Jerusalem. It was about the history of that place. And it was dizzying and hard to keep up because of all the waves of the people. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece under Alexander the Great, and Rome with all the Caesars, the Byzantines, the Muslims from Arabia, the Crusaders from Europe, the Ottoman Turks, and finally the British, all took their place in that land. It was always filled with change. And even when the Hebrews seemed to dominate, we reflect so much on the times of Solomon and David, but even through all those times, it seems there was always a lot of difficulty and challenges and conflict. Sometimes there were two kingdoms, north and south. They were often accommodating the empires that dominated in the area. All of this, they hoped for the opportunity for a home, for a land of their own. They wanted a home. And we think about how important that is to us, especially on this Thanksgiving weekend. We want to have a home. For the Hebrew people, there always was somebody else there. Back in 1948, the British, who had been there for 100 years, established the state of Israel. They pushed the Palestinians aside. It was for the British and for many in the whole world seen as a chance to try to give the Jewish people their due after the Holocaust, after so much discrimination that even happened here in Canada. We rejected boatloads of Jews who were traveling from Europe. And so it seemed to be a good thing to establish this land, that it was important for them, for the diaspora of the Jewish people all over the world, to have a place that they could call home. But people were pushed out. In 1967, there was a settlement where Palestinians were given land in Gaza and the West Bank. There are 2 or 3 levels of administration by Palestinians within those lands, within Israel. There was always lots of discrimination, and it is economic, and that always affects people so much. When we were coming back from Bethlehem in the summer, it was the end of the day, and we looked out the window of the bus as we passed through the border, and there were these waves of people walking down the street. They were workers that had been in Jerusalem. The buses ended a couple of blocks before the border, and then they went across the border to get on more buses. They go to other parts of Israel because the wages are so much better. The Palestinian areas are not very well developed, and there is so much discrimination. Of course, we hear so much about the Jewish settlements in Palestinian lands as well, that in the West Bank, they will go in and bulldoze villages of Palestinians and build new villages for Jewish people. United Church has always been pretty supportive and sympathetic to the Palestinians. We have, for many years, wanted that they would have some security for themselves and a home for themselves in this land of Israel. Some of us will remember Al Forrest, who was for many years editor of the United Church Observer. He started out actually in ministry down at First United in Port Credit. In 1971, he wrote the book, The Unholy Land. He talked about all of this conflict that goes on in this land that is very special for 3 different religions. And I remember great debate, great anger being expressed at meetings and especially at conference, because it was breaking some of those relationships we were working at to try to connect with the Jewish people in the synagogues in our communities. And that this somehow was working against that. But for us, it is being realistic and trying to say, these are people who were pushed out. and that they need a home as well. And we are now hearing so much about that conflict this weekend, the many deaths, the many missiles that are going into opposing areas. The idea of land, the idea of the earth, is so dominant in the Old Testament. It was a promised land by God. The people had felt uprooted and homeless for so long, for so much of history. And this idea of the land and the home was so important to them. And certainly, we identify with that. We identify with their yearnings and hopes and resolve about the land. It's because we're so attached to our homes, whether they are standalone or apartments. We spend lots of effort in decorating and furnishing our homes. We spend an awful lot of time sometimes on our gardens and our lawns. Our homes are so important for us. We somehow find it what we identify with and where we experience security and hope. And so the home, the land, is important to us. And so today, we celebrate, we thank God for what we have and for our homes. And we think of other areas where people do not feel they have a home. We think today especially of Israel, that three religions see as the center of their faith and has experienced so much conflict and so much difficulty in being able to be together. We think of this time in which there are great migrations of people throughout the world. People who have to move from their homes because of war, moving because of economics, moving because of climate change. I was just hearing last week of a report out of a climate center in northeastern US. They were talking about what's going to happen in 30 years when the seas rise and so much of Florida is flooded. And all those people will have to migrate to the north, and how small towns in the north are going to be overwhelmed by the migration. We think about the trials within our own area where we depend on migration. We need 500,000 a year immigration to be able to sustain our economy because many of us have such a low birth rate. Well, this weekend, I just heard I'm having another grandchild next spring. But we need that more people come to our area. But that puts lots of pressure on housing and causes troubles for lots of people. And so we think today of those people who feel they can't have a home because their prices are too high and interest rates are high and jobs are sometimes sparing. And so we think about those next generations. Many of us have children and grandchildren who feel that they found it so hard to get into a home and to be able to have a place that they call their own. And so we think today about those next generations, and especially today about people who are homeless and couch surfing and living on the street. And so home is so important for us. And so we recognize that, yes, it is a challenge for so much of our world, but we are thankful in this time for our homes that God has given to us, this earth that we are so much rooted in. Let us join in prayer. Oh God, we thank you today for all the blessings that you give to us, and we are glad for the homes that we have and for the earth that is so important to us, that we are rooted here. We think, oh God, about the so many people around the world who are lacking of roots, lacking of a home, and just be with them in this time. Oh God, we come together celebrating that you have given this to us, and you have given to us an opportunity to share with others. Amen.